We're here with Rohan from Slab Mafia Sports and Slab Mafia Grading, and we're gonna look at some cards and review them, and we're gonna get Rohan's thoughts. He's gonna kind of talk you through what he does when he looks at cards for grading and give you some tips for what to look for so you can be better at it as well.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Scott. So I think the first card I want to talk about is the Jimmy Butler. First off, beautiful card. I've always been a little bit of a Jimmy Butler fan because my high school coach was very good friends with him. But I love the centering on this card. And, you know, Prism's always been like a pretty hard set to center all of the years except for maybe 2017. The good thing is the corners look really good on this card. Maybe the bottom right there. And on Prism in general, and any of the chrome sets, I always look at the back corners more than I look at the front corners because the back corners is usually where most of the damage is you're able to see it. And I believe the bottom right, you can't see it super well because it's white, but you do have a little bit of corner damage right there. Now, are you okay if I pull it out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
You're a pro, of course.
Yeah, let's take a look at this card. I love this card right here.
Now, when you first look at a card, is there something you look at first? You look at corners, centering, sir. What's the first thing you look at when you pick up a raw card?
I would say centering, then corners are the two things I look at the most. Edges are a little bit harder to look at. You really got to look at it once you get it out of the case for that. And surface, which I think is the most important thing, is probably the last thing that I look at.
I completely agree. I always say and with food, they say you eat with your eyes first. I feel like centering is eating with your eyes. It's the first thing you see. It's the easiest to gauge. But then, like you said, the surface, though, that's a tougher task.
Unfortunately, though, you can sometimes get catfished on cards. And what looks like a really good card at first, once you take out of the sleeve, that might not be the case. And unfortunately, that happens to be the case with this one. You see a scratch right there. That's going to make this a harder grade. You might be able to get it past some of the other companies, and you might be able to get lucky here and there. All the major grading companies do miss something, but a scratch generally bumps a card down to being a max grade of an 8.
Okay.
And so, unfortunately,
that's interesting. I didn't know a max grade of an 8 for a scratch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, that being said, either company could forget at some point, and you could hit a gem. But because everything else on the card looks good, besides that surface.
Yeah.
So that's it for the Jimmy Butler. Let's take a look at some of the other cards. Here's a Reggie White, Skybox. There's rubies, right?
Yes.
So I wish I knew more about 90s inserts. I have lots of good friends that do it. It's a very interesting market. And right here we got a really nice one of Superstar. And a couple of things I noticed on this card. I was looking for some of the rubies that you had earlier. They tend to be pretty condition sensitive.
Absolutely.
And so the threshold for what's considered a good grade is a lot smaller.
Do you notice that with certain sets, the grading companies kind of grade on a curve to a degree? Because I feel like I have with certain condition-sensitive sets.
So it depends on the company. I know that from my experience with National Treasures, you sometimes get a little bit of a protrusion from the patch window just due to the stitching, right? And because of that, I've noticed that Beckett is a little bit easier on those. And always with a little bit of corner damage, the Beckett can be a little bit more lenient on the thicker cards. PSA, on the other hand, tends to be a little bit more lenient with those 90s inserts. I'm sure because they have a lot of top-of-the-line experts with not turning to be a collector of 90s inserts. And we were just looking at Jambalaya before we started recording. There's a lot of edge wear on the back, and it was very, very noticeable by the card grade of PSA 9. And that's probably because they were a little bit more lenient on that because maybe all the cards have it.
That was going to be my follow-up. Are they more lenient with stuff that's manufacturer error that they all have as opposed to something where it's got a big scratch or a ding corner? If it's like a print line, are they more lenient with that because couldn't do anything about it? That's the way it came.
So more recently on that, if you look at the Kaboom set from, I believe it was 2020 or 2021, all of those cards have a print line at the top of the card. And both companies have been pretty hard on those. I'm pretty sure out of all the ones that I've graded personally, the highest that we've gone was a 9. And all of them have an 8.5 or an 8 surface, and that's been the only thing that's held those cards back. And so hopefully, down the line, that becomes, a recognized print defect, and we start seeing them being a little bit more lenient on that print line, on that set specifically. Now, as for this card specifically, from the rubies that I've seen earlier, this one looks pretty good. You got some edge wear at the bottom there. You got a little bit of edge wear at the top there, and a little bit of corner wear right there. Other than that, it looks pretty good. And, it still doesn't look as good as the Jimmy Butler, obviously, but for what the card is, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of PSA 10s and rubies and PMGs.
Right, and they always have the print lines. That entire pattern in general, you always get the print lines, and I'm not even sure if that's print lines or if that's the pattern
The
itself.
design.
And I don't think that's something that they penalize from my experience. Although I've only graded like 3 of these cards in general across all the different sports, sets, etc. So on this card, if I were grading it, I think you're looking at like an 8 to an 8.5. With Beckett, that is. PSA, you might be looking at a 7 to an 8 because it might be a little bit harder on those corners. But, you know, like we saw with the Jambalaya, they could be a little bit more lenient on it, and you could be looking at up to a 9 over there.
Okay.
So
even worst case scenario, 7 up to 8.5, depending on the grader and grade. Yeah, it's not bad for that type of cards.
I would be very, very disappointed.
Very nice.
Both companies are grading a little bit harder right now, so, you know, it's not entirely impossible. Now the next card, Jordan Love. These cards are flying right now. This is another set, 2020 Prism Football, where centering is, you know, pretty hard. But overall, the card looks to have pretty good centering. You know, I've graded a lot of these. Centering's been by far the most important issue, especially with Beckett. And this one looks to have pretty good centering overall. So looking at the back here, you got almost like a little divot over there. It's not like traditional edgeware, but you might be able to see it, might not. But you see a little bit of a dip on the top left edge on the back. And there's a little bit of corner damage near that as well. Some bottom corner damage on the back there too. So right now, I would say we're looking at probably a 9, PSA 9 right now. Hopefully the surface is good, and that ends up being the final grade. Unfortunately, though, we do got a little bit of a dimple right there, and a dimple, if they notice it, tends to also make the max grade like a PSA 8. Other than that, though, I mean, a little bit of what looks to be like surface dust, which, you know, you can wipe off, and I believe PSA does wipe it off now too before they grade the card, or at least they're supposed to. But
do they do not fingerprints though, right? Just kind of surface dust?
That I'm not sure of. Where I'm getting this info from is I believe Nat Turner tweeted about it, and he said that cards are now wiped down before they're being graded. But, you know, everyone makes mistakes, and I always recommend wiping your cards down and getting them examined before you turn them in the manual.
100%, because I've definitely seen plenty of cards and slabs where there's a big old thumbprint on it.
Right, and you don't ever want to make that mistake. And I don't think, even for a grading company, regardless of whether they should do it or not, you don't want a PSA 10 slab to have a fingerprint on it. You don't want that BJ's 9.5 slab to have a fingerprint on it. It's just not what people are looking for. But overall, I think this card's probably an 8, just because of that dimple. But you might be able to get lucky, and you might be able to pull it.
What grader would you recommend for that one specifically?
I would say BGS, because they're a little bit lighter on dimples in general, and thank you for bringing that up. I would say with BGS, because the dimple is something that they're a little bit lighter on, you're probably looking at an 8.5 to a 9 on this card, in my opinion. They're going to ding you on the corners, they're going to ding you on the dimple, and once that's done, you're probably looking at a 9 centering and a 9 or 9.5 edges. And overall, you know, it's pretty good.
It's one of those cards. There's only 10, so grades don't matter quite as much.
Right. Exactly.
That's the nice thing about rare cards, right?
Exactly.
All right, we're going to finish up with a couple Randy Mosses.
So, and the reason why I wanted to pull out both these cards to look at together is because I wanted to talk about how both these cards kind of have the same issues, but I guarantee you this one's going to grade worse. And the reason why is because with the colored border, the edgeware and the cornerware is a lot more noticeable on this card. If you take a look over there. And if you look at this one, the corners and edges are obviously white, so you got to look a little bit closer to see that damage. And generally speaking, whether the damage is equal or not, the more noticeable it is, the worse of a grade you're going to get. That being said, both of these cards are beautiful. I love looking at y'all's Randy Moss PC. It's amazing to look at. Now, talking about the cards in general, if I had to pick a favorite, I would go with this one because you get the game use patch as well, and it's hand number, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And all these cards belong to members of NextGem. You can find rare, cool cards like this on the app, so definitely check it out. All right, so Rohan, tell us about what you do, where people can find you, and how you can help them maximize their grading returns.
So I run a group submission business. We submit weekly to PSA and Beckett. All of our shipments are 100% insured, and my goal in general with the submission business is to create a way for collectors and investors alike to get the grades that they need for their assets in the cheapest way possible and the most efficient way possible. And I try to make it a goal of mine to communicate with my clients, to protect my clients, and to get them the best results possible. And if you are interested in my grading services, you can check me out at SlabMafiaGrading. And if you are looking for my personal collection, my personal pieces that I own and that I invest in, then Slab Mafia Sports will have all of that for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you can tell, Rohan is very knowledgeable. He knows his stuff, and he's going to help you get those best returns. He's going to help you cut out all the nuances and little stuff that you don't want to deal with, paperwork. And if there's ever an issue, he's got contacts there. He's going to get it handled for you. And there's just a lot of benefits to working with a submitter beyond just the incredible knowledge and expertise they can offer. So,
Thank you so much.
Rohan's one of my favorite people in the hobby, so definitely check him out. Thank you, Rohan.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.